I thought I was smart. 55 years old, been around the block, survived a divorce and 20 years in manufacturing. But 3 days in the Philippines taught me something I'll never forget. Desperation makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you blind. When a beautiful woman half your age says she loves you after 72 hours, you want to believe it so bad you'll ignore every red flag waving in your face. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers, and he wanted his experience heard. I landed in Cebu with 2 suitcases and a retirement account that looked bigger than it really was. 6 months after my divorce from Janet became final, I needed distance from everything. The empty house in Detroit, the factory job I'd left behind, and the constant reminder that I'd wasted 23 years on someone who called me boring in court papers. The Philippines felt like the perfect reset button. Cheap living, warm weather, and maybe some adventure before I got too old to care. I'd read the forums, watched the YouTube videos, talked to guys online who swore this was paradise for Western men. What they didn't tell you was how lonely paradise could feel when you're sitting in a hotel room at 55, watching Filipino game shows you don't understand. The first 2 days were rough. I walked around Cebu City like a tourist, eating at McDonald's because I was too intimidated to try local food, taking photos of churches and monuments like I was on vacation instead of starting a new life. The heat was overwhelming, the traffic insane, and every conversation felt like I was speaking through water. I started wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe Janet was right. Maybe I was just a boring guy from Detroit who belonged in Detroit, working at the same factory until I died. But then I reminded myself why I left. The silence in that house after she moved out, the way she looked at me those last few months like I was furniture she was tired of arranging around. I needed to be somewhere where someone might see me differently. On day 3, everything changed. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Lahug, trying to figure out how to order something other than black coffee, when she walked in, Carmela. Even now, 6 months later, I can still see her perfectly. Long black hair, wearing a white blouse and jeans, carrying a laptop bag like she owned the place. She sat 2 tables away and started working, typing, fast, completely focused. I kept glancing over, telling myself not to stare, but she was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. When she looked up and caught me watching, instead of turning away like most women would, she smiled. Not a polite smile, but a real one that reached her eyes. "You're American," she said, closing her laptop and walking over to my table. It wasn't a question. "I can always tell. You have that lost tourist look." I laughed, surprised by her directness. "That obvious? Very obvious. Mind if I sit? I'm Carmela." She slid into the chair across from me without waiting for an answer. "Let me guess. First time in the Philippines, staying at one of the hotels near Ayala, wondering if you made a terrible mistake coming here." She was right about everything except the mistake part. Sitting across from her, listening to her. Perfect English, and watching her eyes light up when she talked, I started thinking maybe this was exactly where I was supposed to be. We talked for 2 hours. She told me she was a social media manager, helping local businesses grow their online presence. She was smart, funny, asked questions about my life back home, like she actually cared about the answers. When I told her about the factory, about working the same job for 20 years, she didn't look bored or dismissive like Janet used to. She looked impressed. 20 years, she said, shaking her head. That's loyalty. Filipino men, they jump from job to job, always looking for something better. American men understand commitment. The way she said it made me feel proud of something I'd always seen as a failure to dream bigger. When she suggested dinner the next night, I said yes before she finished the sentence. That evening, she wore a yellow dress that made her look like sunshine. And when she laughed at my stories about factory life back home, I started thinking maybe this retirement thing wouldn't be so lonely after all. We went to a restaurant overlooking the water, and she ordered for both of us, translating the menu and explaining each dish like she was introducing me to her world. "You know what I like about you, Marcus," she said over dessert, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're real, not like the other foreigners who come here thinking they can buy everything with money. You actually listen when people talk. Her hand was warm and soft, and when she didn't pull away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just attraction, but hope. Maybe I wasn't too old for this. Maybe starting over at 55 wasn't pathetic, just brave. We walked along the waterfront after dinner, and when she slipped her arm through mine, I felt like I was 25. Again. By day 3, Carmela was in my hotel room. I know how that sounds, but it didn't feel rushed at the time. It felt natural, like we'd been waiting for each other without knowing it. She came up for coffee after we'd spent the whole day together, touring temples and markets. And somehow coffee turned into conversation. Conversation turned into kissing. And kissing turned into something that felt like coming home after being lost for years. "American men are different," she whispered afterward, her head on my chest. "More gentle, more respectful. Filipino men, they take what they want and don't care how you feel about it. Not all American men are gentle," I said, thinking about some of the guys I'd worked with at the factory. "You are," she said, looking up at me with eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. "I can tell. You've been hurt before, haven't you? Someone didn't appreciate what they had." I told her about Janet, about the divorce, about feeling like I'd wasted half my life on someone who never really saw me. Carmela listened without judgment, running her fingers through the grey hair on my chest like it was precious, instead of embarrassing. "She was stupid," Carmela said simply. "Any woman who doesn't see what you are doesn't deserve you." When we made love that night, she whispered things in my ear about the future, about staying in touch when I eventually went back to Detroit, about maybe visiting America someday. I was falling hard and fast, and every rational thought I'd had about taking things slow disappeared when she looked at me like I was the answer to something she'd been searching for her whole life. "I've never felt this way before," she said, and I believed her because I'd never felt this way either, not even with Janet in the beginning. This was different, deeper, like we were two broken pieces that fit together perfectly. For the next week, we were inseparable. She showed me her Cebu, not the tourist version, but the real one. We ate at tiny restaurants where she translated everything and laughed when I struggled with chopsticks. She introduced me to her friends, who all seemed genuinely happy to meet me, not suspicious or calculating like I'd expected. I started thinking about extending my stay, maybe finding a way to make this permanent. When she talked about her dreams, starting her own marketing business, maybe traveling to America someday, I found myself making mental plans about how I could help make those dreams happen. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. I was back in my hotel room planning our day when my phone rang. Carmela was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Marcus, I need to see you. Something's happened." She was at my door 20 minutes later, her eyes red and swollen, hands shaking as she sat on the edge of my bed. "I'm late," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I took 3 tests. They're all positive." I felt the hotel room spin around me. Pregnant. After 3 days together, she was pregnant. The logical part of my brain started calculating dates, timing, probabilities, but the emotional part, the part that had been lonely for so long, felt something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or purpose. "How do you feel about it?" I asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "Scared," she said, sobbing into my shoulder. "My family is very traditional, very Catholic. If they find out I'm pregnant and not married, they'll disown me. I don't know what to do. What do you want to do?" She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "I want to keep it. I want us to figure this out together. But I'm so scared, Marcus. I don't have anyone else." Part of me wanted to panic. 55 years old, recently divorced, accidentally getting a woman pregnant in a foreign country. It sounded like the setup to a disaster. But another part, the part that had felt useless and forgotten for years, suddenly felt needed. Again, important. Here was a chance to be the man I'd always wanted to be. Protective, responsible, someone who stepped up when it mattered. "We'll figure it out together," I said, and I meant it. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'm not going anywhere." The relief on her face when I said that made me believe I was doing the right thing. That night, I couldn't sleep, staring, at the ceiling and doing math in my head about child support and plane tickets and what it would mean to be a father again at 55. But underneath the anxiety was something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Someone needed me. Someone was counting on me to be the man I'd always hoped I was. The next morning, Carmela came back with a notebook. She'd been up all night, she said, researching everything we'd need to prepare for the baby. Doctor visits, prenatal vitamins, hospital costs, baby supplies. She'd written it all down with the thoroughness of someone who'd actually thought this through. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, opening the notebook and showing me pages of neat handwriting. "But I want to be responsible about this. I want to do everything right for our baby." Our baby. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd never thought I'd hear someone say that again. Never imagined I'd have another chance at being a father. Janet had made it clear early in our marriage that she didn't want children, and by the time I realized how much that mattered to me, it was too late to change either of our minds. "Prenatal care here costs about $300 a month," Carmela continued, running her finger down the list. "Good nutrition, vitamins, regular checkups. I want to make sure everything is healthy, and I'll have to stop working soon. Morning sickness is already making it hard to concentrate, and some of my clients won't understand if I can't meet deadlines." "How much do you need?" I asked. $1,200 a month," she said, not meeting my eyes. I know it sounds like a lot, but it would cover everything. Medical care, my basic needs saving for after the baby comes. I researched everything, Marcus, I'm not just guessing. She showed me printouts from medical websites, cost estimates from local hospitals, even a rough budget for baby supplies. It seemed reasonable, even responsible. This wasn't some random demand for money. This was a woman trying to take care of herself and our child. "What about your family?" I asked. "Won't they help once they know?" Her face darkened. "My family will disown me. In their eyes, I've brought shame on everyone by getting pregnant outside marriage. My mother won't even speak to me if she finds out. You're all I have now, Marcus. I understand if that's too much pressure, but I need you to know the truth." That night, I wired the first $1,200 to her bank account and felt like I was investing in our future. The relief in her voice when she confirmed the transfer made me believe I was doing the right thing. For the first time in months, I felt like a man again, someone who could provide, someone who could protect the people he loved. "Thank you," she said, crying again, but these were different tears. "I promise I'll be careful with every penny. This is for our family, Marcus. Our future. Our future." I loved the sound of that. I started making plans to extend my stay in the Philippines, maybe find a way to get a longer-term visa. If I was going to be a father, I wanted to be present for it. I wanted to hold Carmela's hand during doctor appointments, help her pick out baby clothes, be there when our child was born. The practical questions could be worked out later: visas, citizenship, where we'd live. What mattered was that we were in this together. But as the weeks passed, small things started bothering me. The first sign was subtle. Carmela's English suddenly wasn't as perfect when she talked about the pregnancy. Medical terms she stumbled over, dates that didn't quite add up when I asked follow-up questions. When I suggested accompanying her to a doctor's appointment, she said her family doctor was traditional, didn't like foreign men in the room. "It's not personal," she explained. "He's just old-fashioned, very Catholic. He thinks it's inappropriate for unmarried couples to be together during medical examinations. I promise I'll tell you everything he says." I accepted it because I wanted to, because challenging her felt like doubting our relationship, and I wasn't ready to doubt the best thing that had happened to me in years. The second red flag was her social media. For a social media manager, her own profiles were surprisingly sparse. The business she claimed to work for had no website, no online presence I could find, no client testimonials or portfolio. When I asked about it, she said small local businesses in the Philippines didn't always have big online footprints. "Not everyone here is like American businesses," she said. "Some of my clients still do everything in person, word of mouth. They trust me to handle their social media, but they don't even understand what I do half the time." It made sense, I supposed. Different culture, different way of doing business. But when she sent me ultrasound photos a few days later, grainy, Black and white images with her name typed at the bottom. All my doubts dissolved. There it was, proof that this was real. Our baby, barely visible but undeniably there. When she called that evening, describing how she'd cried when she first saw the heartbeat, I cried too. "I wish you could have been there," she said. "Someday, when we're married, you'll be able to come to all the appointments." Marriage. We hadn't talked about it directly, but it felt inevitable now. How else could this work? A month into sending the payments, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Carmela's lifestyle hadn't changed much despite claiming financial hardship. Her social media posts showed new clothes, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, on my retirement budget, weekend trips with friends that looked expensive. When I asked about it, trying to sound casual instead of suspicious, she had an explanation ready. "My cousin Elena has been helping out," she said, "buying me things to keep my spirits up during the pregnancy. She knows how hard this is for me being cut off from my family. She's trying to make sure I don't get too depressed." The explanation felt thin, but I didn't push. I was afraid of seeming controlling, afraid of driving her away. That's the trap of these relationships. You're always walking on eggshells, terrified of losing the one good thing you think you found. So I sent the second payment and told myself everything was fine. Maybe pregnant women needed emotional support as much as financial support. Maybe her cousin was just being kind. Maybe I was being paranoid because Janet's betrayal had made me suspicious of everyone. But the doubt was there now, a small worm of anxiety that grew a little bigger every time something didn't quite add up. When I tried to video call during her doctor appointments, she was always in areas with bad reception. When I asked for copies of her medical records, she said the clinic didn't provide them to patients. When I suggested flying back to be with her for the second trimester, she said it wasn't a good time. She was having complications that required rest and quiet. "The doctor says stress is bad for the baby," she explained. "Having you here, wonderful as it would be, might be too exciting right now. I need to stay calm and focused on being healthy." I wanted to argue. But how do you argue with someone? Who's carrying your child? How do you demand proof when you're supposed to be supportive? So I swallowed my questions and sent the money, telling myself that love required trust. And trust meant accepting what she told me, even when it felt wrong. A few weeks later, she asked me to meet Eleanor. Her cousin wanted to thank me personally for helping Carmela through such a difficult time. We met at a restaurant in downtown Cebu, another young woman with perfect English and a sad story. Single mother, struggling to make ends meet, grateful for any help from Carmela's kind American boyfriend. "Carmela talks about you all the time," Elena said over dinner, smiling warmly. "She's so lucky to have found someone who cares about her and the baby. Not many men would step up the way you have." It should have made me feel good, but something about the way Eleanor spoke felt rehearsed, like she'd had this conversation before with other American men. Over dessert, she casually mentioned how many Western men had helped their family over the years. Generous men, she called them, always willing to support Filipino families in need. "It's one of the things I love about Americans. You have such big hearts." The way she said it made my stomach turn. Not the sentiment itself, but the familiarity of it, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. Carmela squeezed my hand under the table and smiled, and I pushed the feeling down. I was being paranoid again. Eleanor was just grateful, just acknowledging what she saw as American kindness. There was nothing sinister about appreciation. But that night, after we'd said goodbye to Elena and gone back to my hotel, Carmela brought up something that made my paranoia spike. "Elena's having a really hard time right now," she said, curled up against me in bed. "Her kids need school supplies, and she's behind on rent. I was wondering if maybe you could help her out too. Just a small amount, maybe $200. I know it's a lot to ask, but she's been so good to me during this pregnancy." "She's been good to you how?" "Emotional support. Taking me to doctor appointments when you can't be here. Making sure I eat properly. She's like a sister to me, Marcus. Without my family, she's all I have." I said I'd think about it, but I was already wondering how deep this rabbit hole went. First $1,200 a month for Carmela, now $200 for Elena. How many other family members would need help? How many generous American boyfriends had Elena met over the years? But when I looked at Carmela, at her growing belly that I couldn't quite see yet but trusted was there, I felt guilty for doubting her. She was carrying my child. She needed support, not suspicion. I sent Elena $200 the next day, telling myself it was a one-time thing. Carmela's gratitude was overwhelming. Tears, kisses, promises that she'd never forget how kind I was being to her family. That night, she talked about the future again, about bringing the baby to America to meet me when I went back to Detroit, about maybe getting married so we could all be together permanently. I know this isn't how people usually do things, she said, meeting and falling in love and getting pregnant so fast, but sometimes life doesn't follow the normal timeline. Sometimes you just know when something is right. I wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored the voice in my head asking why Elena needed help again just 2 weeks later. This time, it was a medical emergency. Her youngest child had gotten sick, needed medicine the family couldn't afford. Another $150, Carmela said, would make all the difference. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, she said. But Elena is the only family I have left, and if something happened to her kids because we couldn't help, I'd never forgive myself. The money requests were getting more frequent, but so were the ultrasound photos and updates about the pregnancy. Carmela sent me pictures of her growing belly, though it was hard to tell if there was actually any change. She described morning sickness, food cravings, the way the baby kicked when she played music. Every detail felt real, personal, intimate. When she called crying because she'd felt the baby move for the first time, I cried too. When she sent a photo of tiny baby shoes she'd bought, I started looking at cribs online. 3 months into the pregnancy, the call I'd been dreading came. Carmela was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her through the phone static. "Marcus, something terrible has happened. I need you to come here. I need you." "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "I lost it," she said, the words coming out in broken gasps. "I lost the baby. Miscarriage. 10 weeks. The doctor said these things happen, but I don't understand why. I was so careful, took all my vitamins, did everything right." The hotel room went silent around me. I felt like I was falling through the floor, through the earth, into some dark place where nothing made sense. Our baby was gone. The future we'd been planning, the life we'd been building, all of it disappeared in a phone call. "I'm so sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "I'm coming there. I'll get on the next plane." "No," she said quickly. "Don't come. Not yet. My family is involved now. They found out about the pregnancy, about you, about everything. There's too much chaos. Right now, I need time to deal with them, time to heal. The doctor says I need rest and quiet. But I want to be with you. I want to help you through this. I know you do, and I love you for that. But this isn't a good time. My family is angry, saying terrible things about foreign men and Filipino, women who get involved with them. If you came here now, it would make everything worse. I should have gotten on a plane anyway, should have demanded to see the medical records, to talk to the doctors, to hold her while she grieved. But grief and guilt have a way of making you passive, making you accept what people tell you, instead of fighting for what you need. So I stayed in Detroit, sending money for medical bills and recovery expenses, trying to support her from 8,000 miles away while my own heart broke. The red flags were waving so hard I couldn't ignore them anymore, but somehow I did anyway. Carmela needed time to heal, she said. The miscarriage had been traumatic, and the doctors recommended counseling, specialized care, treatments that weren't covered by basic insurance. 500 here, 300 there, always with detailed explanations and apologies for asking. "I hate that this is costing so much," she said during one of our video calls, looking pale and tired. "I hate that you have to take care of me when you're dealing with your own grief. But the counseling is helping. The doctor says it's important to process this properly, or it could affect my ability to get pregnant again in the future." Again. The word gave me hope even as everything else felt wrong. Maybe we could try again someday. Maybe this was just a terrible setback, not an ending. I kept sending money and telling myself I was helping the woman I loved heal from losing our child. But after 2 more months of medical bills and recovery expenses, something inside me finally broke. Maybe it was the fourth request for money to cover specialized therapy. Maybe it was the way Carmela's social media posts showed her looking happy and healthy, while she told me she was still struggling with depression. Maybe it was just the accumulation of too many small lies that finally added up to something I couldn't ignore. I hired a private investigator. It cost me $800, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to know if I was supporting a grieving mother or funding an elaborate lie. The wait for the report felt like dying slowly. 2 weeks of wondering if I was about to discover I'd been the world's biggest fool, or if I was about to feel terrible for doubting someone I loved. The report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered in a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. I sat in my kitchen in Detroit, drinking coffee that had gone cold, and read the words that shattered everything I'd believed for the past 6 months. Carmela Santos existed. She lived in Cebu City, worked occasionally as a freelance marketing assistant, had no criminal record or outstanding warrants, but she'd never been pregnant. The ultrasound photos were stock images downloaded from medical websites. The cousin Elena was actually her roommate, and they'd been running this scam on Western men for over a year. Bank records showed my money going toward rent, clothes, restaurants, and a weekend trip to Palawan, not medical bills or baby supplies. The investigator had found 3 other men who'd sent money to Carmela over the past 2 years, 2 Americans and 1 Australian, all between 50 and 65, all recently divorced or widowed. One had sent over $8,000 before figuring out the truth. Another was still sending money, still believing his Filipino girlfriend was recovering from a miscarriage that never happened. I'd sent nearly $5,000 to a woman who saw me as nothing more than a lonely ATM with a heartbeat. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was realizing how desperately I'd wanted to believe her lies, how hungry I'd been for someone to need me, someone to love me, someone to make me feel like a man worth something. She'd read that desperation like a neon sign and built her entire performance around it. Every conversation we'd had, every intimate moment, every whispered promise about the future, it had all been calculated. While I'd been falling in love and planning for fatherhood, she'd been managing me like any other client. Saying exactly what I needed to hear, creating exactly the emotions that would keep the money flowing, disappearing whenever I got too close to the truth. I called her with the evidence in front of me, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful like always. "Marcus, I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling today?" "I know," I said simply. The silence stretched between us across the ocean. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the sweet, vulnerable woman who cried about losing our baby. In her place was someone cold and calculating, someone who'd been waiting for this call. "Know what? I know there was never a baby. I know the ultrasound photos were fake. I know Elena is your roommate, not your cousin. I know everything, Carmela." She didn't deny it. There was no point. Instead, she laughed, not the warm, musical laugh I'd fallen in love with, but something harsh and bitter. "You hired someone to investigate me," she said. It wasn't a question. "How much did that cost?" "Another $800 you could have saved." "I want my money back." "No, you don't," she said. "You want to believe this never happened. You want to go back to thinking you were special, thinking some beautiful young woman fell in love with you in 3 days. But that was never real, Marcus. You know that now. You stole from me. I never stole anything. You gave it willingly, every dollar, every transfer, every payment. You chose to send that money. No one forced you to be stupid." She was right, and that made it worse. I'd handed over everything because I wanted so badly to be needed, to be loved, to matter to someone that I'd ignored every warning sign, every rational thought, every instinct that told me something was wrong. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because you were perfect," she said simply. "Lonely American man, recently divorced, plenty of money, desperate to feel important again. You practically had victim written across your forehead. You think you're the first? You won't be the last." The conversation lasted 10 minutes. She didn't apologize, didn't try to justify what she'd done, didn't pretend there had ever been any real emotion involved. When I asked if anything between us had been real, she was quiet for a long moment. The sex was okay, she said finally. Better than some of the others, but no, Marcus, nothing was real. Nothing was ever real. She blocked my number after that, disappeared from social media, vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. All I had left were bank statements and the bitter taste of my own desperation. The investigator's report went into a filing cabinet with my divorce papers and other evidence of relationships that had failed. Another chapter closed, another lesson learned too late to matter. 6 months later, I'm still in Detroit, still alone, but not the same man who got on that plane to Cebu looking for adventure. The money is gone. Not just what I sent Carmela, but the cost of learning who I really was. A lonely man so hungry for connection that I'd have believed anything from a beautiful woman who told me I mattered. The retirement account that looked so impressive when I landed in the Philippines is smaller now, diminished by my need to be needed. The forums are full of guys like me, trading stories about Filipino girlfriends and Thai wives, most of them chasing the same fantasy I was. Some of them probably found real love. Others probably learned what I learned, that desperation makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability makes you prey. I don't participate in those discussions anymore. I don't offer advice or share warnings. What's the point? Every man thinks he's different, thinks his situation is special, thinks he'll be the one who finds real love in a foreign country, just like I did. I don't hate Carmela anymore. Hate requires energy I don't have, emotion I can't spare. She was surviving the only way she knew how, and I was an easy target. A middle-aged American with money and loneliness written all over. His face walking around Cebu City like I had "Rescue Me" tattooed on my forehead. In her world, maybe what she did wasn't even wrong. Maybe it was just business, just another way to make a living in a country where opportunities are scarce and Western men are plentiful. The hardest part isn't the financial loss. Money can be earned back. Retirement accounts can be rebuilt. The hardest part is accepting that I was so starved for affection that I created an entire relationship in my head based on 3 days and a lie. Every conversation we had, every moment I thought we were building something real, it was all performance on her part and delusion on mine. She was acting, and I was the audience, applauding every scene and begging for more. That's what these scams really steal from you. Not just money, but your ability to trust your own judgment. Now, when I meet women, even back home in Detroit, I second-guess every smile, every compliment, every gesture of interest. Is she being genuine? Or am I just projecting what I want to see? Did my desperation show that clearly to everyone, or just to professional predators who specialize in recognizing it? Some nights I wonder if I'll ever be able to love someone again without calculating the cost. The worst moments come at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep, replaying conversations that never meant what I thought they meant, remembering how it felt when she said she loved me, how that filled up something inside me that had been empty for so long. Even knowing it was fake, even understanding that every word was carefully chosen to manipulate me, I can still feel the echo of that happiness. That's the cruelest part. For a few weeks I believed I was lovable again. I believed someone saw value in the man I'd become at 55, flaws and all. Now I see myself more clearly, and it's not a pretty picture. A factory supervisor from Detroit who thought retirement in the Philippines would solve problems that started long before I got on that plane. Janet didn't leave me because I was boring. She left because I'd stopped trying to be interesting, stopped trying to grow, stopped believing I was worth the effort. The man who met Carmela in that coffee shop was already broken. She didn't break me. She just showed me how broken I already was. I'm not the same man who landed in Cebu looking for adventure. I'm more careful now, more skeptical, but maybe that's not entirely bad. The romantic in me died somewhere between the fake ultrasound photos and the private investigator's report, but the pragmatist who survived might be stronger for it. I've started volunteering at a local community center, teaching job skills to guys who've been laid off from the factories. It's not romance, but it's connection, real connection based on shared experience and mutual respect, not fantasy and financial desperation. Some of these guys have been through their own versions of my story. Different countries, different women, same empty feeling afterward. We don't talk about it much, but we understand each other. There's something valuable in that understanding. Something I never had when I was married to Janet or dreaming about paradise overseas. These men know what it's like to rebuild your life from scratch at an age when most people think their story is already written. The community center work has taught me something Carmela never could, that being needed doesn't require being deceived. The guys I help with their resumes, the ones who practice interview skills or learn to use computers for job searches, they need what I can offer. Not my money, not my loneliness, not my desperation to matter, just my knowledge, my experience, my willingness to help them figure out their next steps. It's a different kind of purpose, quieter than romance but more sustainable. I still think about the Philippines sometimes, not about Carmela, that wound has mostly healed, but about the country itself, the warmth, the friendliness of people who weren't trying to scam me, the beauty I barely noticed while I was focused on falling in love. Maybe someday I'll go back, not looking for a relationship but just to travel, to see the places I missed while I was busy creating a fantasy. Maybe by then I'll be ready to appreciate them for what they actually are, instead of what I need them to be. But not yet. Right now I'm learning to be content with the life I have in Detroit. It's not the life I dreamed about during those lonely months after my divorce, but it's real. The men at the community center are real. The small satisfaction of helping someone find work is real. The quiet evenings in my house, reading or watching television without the constant anxiety of wondering if someone is lying to me, that's real too. If you're thinking about chasing love overseas because life at home feels empty, I won't tell you not to go, but I'll tell you this.